Jhon Arias finally departs Fluminense to join Wolves in the Premier League. Danilo leaves the Premier League to go back to Brazil, whilst Richard Rios finally finds a new club in Europe after 2 to 3 seasons of debate as to where he's going. The Colombian is off to Benfica. All that and more on this episode of the Copper Club podcast, where Jess and I will talk through those player moves, what we think, and we'll also talk about Brazil's top goal scorer back at home, loving life at the moment. We'll save that towards the end. But Jess, welcome back to the podcast. How are we?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. Just trying to follow up with all the transfer rumors and stuff. If people like follow me or know me a little bit, they know I love this period, even though it's a bit stressful as a football fan because of the endless possibilities. So yeah, it's been good. We have some interesting moves happening.
Absolutely. We knew that it would pick up its pace after the Club World Cup, and Jhon Arias, who was one of the stars of the show at the Club World Cup, he has finally left Fluminense and he's on his way to Wolverhampton Wanderers in the Premier League. Part of me is so sad to see him leave Brazil because he's been so good to watch domestically, but he deserves his opportunity in the Premier League. And for me, I feel like Wolves is the perfect place for him to go if we look at their South American South American contingency that they're building there. Obviously, we get to see Jhon Arias linked backing up with Andre, which will be very exciting. The pair who won the Copa Libertadores only in 2023. He partners back up with him. But Jhon Arias, we spoke about him in depth over the Club World Cup. He got himself into the starting 11 or the best 11 from the Club World Cup as a whole, which was a huge sign of his promise. Yes, he may be 27 years old, soon to be 28, but it just goes to show that if there's a player in there, they deserve their opportunity. And Wolves have taken that chance, which has been really refreshing to see because we only ever see Premier League clubs looking for babies, right? 16, 17, 18. Once you got past 21, apparently in the footballing world, you are officially old. But Jhon Arias deserves his opportunity, doesn't he, Jess? Well, I know we're huge fans on the podcast, but I know you adore him.
Yeah, I do. He's been my favorite player from for Brasileirão for a couple of years now. The player that I enjoyed watching the most. And obviously, I'm not a Fluminense fan, so it's just uh, it's a little bit heartbreaking in a way because, as I said, it's my favorite player to watch. But I'm also a huge Premier League fan, being a Chelsea fan, and also excited to see how he does in the Premier League. I think from the Fluminense the fan base point, they're a little bit upset, not only because obviously he has been their best player for a couple of years, but because of the amount. He is not going for a huge fee compared to moves that we are seeing with other players. And I personally also consider it to be a very, very low fee. So Wolverhampton, in my opinion, are getting, a phenomenal player in a very, very good deal. But if you look at just Fluminense's aspect, I think they got him for around like 3 million euros. So the fact that they got him for such a low fee based on scouting, he managed to help them for years and get the major honors, even with Copa Libertadores, and now even make a profit of it, whilst also respecting the players' wishes because they, promised him that they would allow him to go for a move that he really wanted to go. So I think in terms of being, that good relationship with the club and the player at the end, I mean, I'm not going to say it's a great deal for Fluminense because it's not, but I can at least understand what happened, and they still made a profit in the end. But as for Wolverhampton fans and also Premier League fans, neutral fans, we got a little bit of a glimpse in the Club World Cup, right? So he is a player that if you watch him for the club and if you watch him for his national team, you can see how he is versatile in the sense of the positions that he can occupy on the pitch. So if you look at Fluminense, obviously he has like Cano, who helps him up in that front too, but he tends to work more as a winger, either on the right or on the left, just as that man who drives forward and does the progressive passes and is responsible for finding those, being the carrier of the team, let's say. But if you look at him for Colombia, he mainly plays in the central area, being someone that actually goes back towards the middle and kind of the engine in a way. So there are similarities in the sense that even when he plays on the wing, he likes to cut inside and occupy the half spaces and all of that. But they are kind of different positions, which just show his versatility. And as I mentioned, he has played on the right, he has played on the left. He fluctuates a lot for Fluminense, even though he plays mainly on the right. You see him always like changing the wings and trying to go after the ball. He's someone that doesn't hide away. He always tries to create something. And as we mentioned here, his physicality paired with his ability like on the ball to just like almost hide the ball and fantastic dribbler, it's just such a nuisance when you're talking about rival players. So I'm just very, very intrigued to see what he does in the Premier League. And I don't see any negatives for for Wolverhampton, and their fans should be very, very happy with this deal, in my opinion.
I think what sticks out to me is with Fluminense, they've crumbled since that 2023 Libertadores. That team has been picked apart. We've spoken before on the podcast how they were almost relegated, but it was Jhon Arias was one of the two or three players who did enough to keep them up. And I think that showed so much of his attitude to stay with the team. I think he felt like he owed so much to the team, which gave him the opportunity in Brazil. But what you touched on there in terms of, like you said, how he hides the ball and he's played these numerous roles, right, for Fluminense. I think it's so important that that will transition well to the Premier League. He's happy to, we've seen it over the last 6-12 months more than anything because Fluminense haven't been good going forward. Arias has had to change his responsibility and drop deep, pick up the ball. But we saw that at the Club World Cup as well. He's comfortable doing it. And we saw it against some of the best players, as we spoke about. I think it was on the last episode, how he was facing Inter Milan, Al Hilal, Dortmund, yet he was coming off as the best player on the pitch, which is why I'm giving hats off to Wolves for getting this deal done. Just because he's 27, if anything, he's entering his prime. He's going across to the Premier League more mature. Like, he hasn't just jumped ship. He's come out and said that this decision was really difficult, but I've looked at it from a cool head. It came out recently that he had the opportunity to go to Al Nassr in Saudi, and obviously money wasn't the factor here. He wanted to go to the Premier League, and with Wolves, they're going to be a team against the top 4-5 where they will need players like Jhon Arias to drop deep, pick up the ball, use his magic to work up the pitch rather, and release that pressure. But he's so calm and composed and confident in his ability. And I know you said there that Fluminense fans aren't happy with the price, and I get it. But what would his price have been if he hadn't performed like that in the Club World Cup? Or if there wasn't the Club World Cup, he probably would have been going for 12, 15 million euros. So to get 20 plus, I can see why it's not a good deal. But I think Wolves have almost deserve it in the way that they're giving him this opportunity as he's moving into his prime. And I think the fact that he is so willing to give the Premier League a go, even if he doesn't like settle in the first 6 to 12 months, he's still only 28. It will take a bit of time, but that South American contingency, which is at Wolves, gives him a real opportunity. And I think the loyalty he's shown to Fluminense, he will show that to Wolves as well. And I think that counts for an awful lot. Yes, he's a wonderful player on the pitch, but off the pitch, he comes across like such a mature figure. Obviously, the reason why he didn't leave Fluminense, as far as I'm aware, was the birth of his daughter, settled in Brazil. Everything was going well. So I think it is a testament to his character. And I always like to see that in a transfer. Yes, you can be amazing on the pitch, but what are you like off the pitch? And Jhon Arias has been well respected. No one's got a bad word to say about him. And he's just so calm and composed. I know I keep going back to that, but his physicality we saw in the Club World Cup as well was great to see, because you always get that question, can they handle it? Well, we saw from the Brazilian teams that they're up for the fight against European teams. And this move just ticks so many boxes for me. And I think he's chosen wisely. And I'm glad that he wasn't persuaded by the Saudi move. So he's coming across. He'll probably need a couple of weeks or a few weeks to find his rhythm at least, because obviously after the Club World Cup. But he's going there with players around him, a manager, obviously, who will speak his language as well. Just seems like a really good fit, doesn't it, Jess?
It does. And one thing I would like to highlight that I was like I meant to talk about it before, but you brought it up is his character, which is something that I've always really loved about him. And I think also the fans will like about him. He is the drama-free kind of player, head down, just works, shows what he does on the pitch. And as you mentioned, the connection that he had and the respect that he had with the fans from Fluminense. And you saw after their elimination in the Club World Cup how he was just bawling and crying because he wanted to give them so much more. And so he is someone who will give everything on the pitch. And obviously, as a fan of football, it's just so nice to see. And just yeah, I mean, I can't speak more about him. I'm just a huge fan of his, and I just hope it works out. And I hope that people get to know a little bit more about him, and maybe they can, fall in love with him, same as you and me. So we'll see.
A player who I have adored and fallen in love with probably long before Jhon Arias was Danilo from his time at Palmeiras. Deservedly got a nice move across to Europe, went to Nottingham Forest, scored some key goals for them. And then the ankle injury at the start of the campaign, well, last season, ruined his confidence, ruined what we saw with Danilo, because Danilo came across having won everything in Brazil as a defensive midfielder, a number 6. Yet for Forest, he was operating so much better as a number 8. But after that ankle injury, there were so many rumours about where he's going to go next. And he's joined Botafogo's project at quite, it's a very interesting move, at quite a good time with Gregory moving across to Qatar. That number 6 role, if he is going to adopt that back in Brazil, is there for him. And I know Botafogo have lost players to Nottingham Forest over the last transfer window, but the rebuild doesn't look too bad already. How they're piecing this team together under Angelotti Jr., we'll call him for this particular podcast. They've looked pretty sharp after the Club World Cup as well. And to spend such a vast amount of money, 25 million euros, I think it is, between 20 to 25 million euros to get Danilo back to Brazil and in a Botafogo shirt is really interesting. How do you see this, Jess? Because it's a bit bittersweet for me, purely because I wanted Danilo to succeed in England. And there was talks of him being linked with Arsenal and being worth a 40, 50, 60 million euro player if his development continued. But that injury halted any sort of progress. But being back in Brazil, this could be what reignites him.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those things that sometimes you have to take like and quote unquote, right? So take a step back to take two steps forward. And it's not saying that Botafogo, I mean, obviously we're fans of Brasileirão, so it's nothing like, we're diminishing the league or anything. But obviously he was like the major player for me back at Palmeiras before he's moved to the Premier League. I remember we had the Club World Cup, the old format, and it had Palmeiras and Chelsea. And I got interviewed for it, and I said, you just have to lock down Danilo because everything goes through him. If you lock him down, if you manage to not get him on the ball, then we're good. Because even though he played majorly as a 6, the line breaking passes of him is just fantastic. And so we managed to do that. Kovacic was on him all the time to ensure that. So it's not like it was something that just I saw. Everybody saw that he was the big engine. So when he moved to Forest, he moved with this huge tag of being this wonder talent, of being maybe the next big thing in midfield for Brazil, and that the expectations were very high. But as you mentioned, the injury kind of it kind of stalled his progress. I think by the time that he came back, I mean, you would know much more than I do when it comes to the Forest squad. When he came back, you already had new additions in midfield, so it was a little bit harder for him to even get back into the side. So, just looking at this move, I think it's wonderful. Again, obviously, as a neutral, Palmeiras fans are raging at this, obviously, being huge rivals of Botafogo. But as a neutral, is a phenomenal move, I think, both for him and for Botafogo. I think if they manage to get Danilo back to his best, or at least close to that, they can actually improve in terms of squad, in terms of quality. I do expect him to be like the the replacement, as you mentioned, for Gregory. So that's what I expect him to do on this side. But I'm just very intrigued to see how he does. And obviously, as you mentioned, the Ancelotti Jr. Connection and with the national team, it might be, but I can't say it is, but it might be like an easier step, let's say, to the national team, because obviously you're going to be working with someone who's going to be and continues to be the assistant for Ancelotti in the national team, which is his son, and that won't change because he is now the manager and the head coach for Botafogo. So obviously he's going to have a chance to impress on a day-to-day basis the assistant coach of the national team. So it also gives that little bit of window of opportunity for him to just work that much harder to get back to his best form. So I'm just very, very intrigued to see how he does and how he settles. And, as a fan of his, because we've talked about him before as well, and we both agree on this, that we are huge fans. I'm just happy and excited that he's going to get a chance to play consistently, which I don't think he would have at Forest because of the injury, as I said, losing the first team status, and obviously seeing how Forest was performing in the past season, it would be kind of hard to expect him to get a chance to be an immediate starter or anything like that. But as a Brazilian, I will say I'm a little bit mad at Forest. Completely subjective here, because they had Andre, they didn't utilize him. They had Danilo, and then things didn't work out. So I'm just a bit annoyed.
I get it.
Obviously now you're
I'm with you.
but obviously now I think you're gonna have a huge chance, obviously with Igor Jesus, and we've talked about them before, center backs with Joyes. So hopefully for Brazilians, we're gonna have a little bit, better luck this time. And I think we will. I'll be honest. I think we will, but we have to wait on this one.
Yeah. I'm not going to comment on that one for now, but I was quite surprised to see no European teams take a chance on Danilo. But as you brought up there with the national team, and I think a few Forest fans or Premier League fans maybe listening to this may laugh at the fact that, Danilo going to the Brazilian team when he's going back to Brazil. Well, we've seen it over the last couple of years. Paulinho didn't work out at Leverkusen, then won the Golden Boot, and then he found his way back in, yes, under a different manager, but it is proving to be a route. It's not a case of you have to be in Europe to get into this team. And look, Botafogo have every chance of winning the Libertadores again this season. Like, there's no reason why you can't rule them out. They're building a nice team. Just because they've lost players doesn't mean it's the end of the road. I will hold my hands up. I wrote them off very early in the season, and they're completely showing me up. So Danilo could be that missing piece they require, because I think he comes back to Brazil not just as a number 6, but as someone who can get higher up the pitch. Yes, you alluded to his line-breaking passes and how he likes to take the ball forward, but I think the key goals he scored for Forest at times has probably shown that he can step it up and play in a more advanced role when Botafogo may need him. So a really interesting move. I hope it works out for him. He's a wonderful kid as well. Like, is everything which Forest posted about him as well, and just his like pure innocence and how he was a fan favourite, to be honest with you. And it's a shame it hasn't worked out, but maybe this is, like you said, that one step back to go 2 forward. And we wish him the very best at Botafogo. Now, let's move across to Richard Rios, a player who divides opinion, probably more so with me than anyone else. I seem to be one of the only most people seem to be very pro Richard Rios, where I've always been quite hesitant and I've not shied away from that. But he's finally secured his move. He's moving across to Benfica, and I am going to applaud that. I'm not going to say I sit and watch Benfica every week, but the move seems to be much better, because I had concerns of him moving across to the Premier League. I also think that Palmeiras outpriced what Premier League teams wanted to pay. Around 30 million euros in the end was quite a substantial fee, but I get it. He's a Colombian regular international. He's did very well at the Club World Cup. I'm not saying he's a poor player by any means. He is very, very strong. I had concerns if he went to the Premier League working on his own. I think he would have to be partnered up with another number 6 who was probably a bit more reserved, if that makes sense. But anyway, let's put his negatives to one side, because I am excited to see him in Europe, and I think going to Portugal will be a good fit, especially at one of the bigger clubs where they will dominate games. And when we see Colombia dominate games and getting the ball forward, Richard Rios comes into his own. Jess, do you agree with me in terms of it being the right fit? Are you a little bit disappointed that he didn't go to the Premier League as of yet?
No, I'm not. I think when we talked about him in the last episode, I think, I'm not sure if it was the last, but we talked about recent episodes,
Yeah.
and you asked me whether or not I felt like he would get a move to Europe, and I was confident that he would. But I don't think, right, I would agree with you. I don't think going to the Premier League would be the right move for him, and I believe there's a reason why the two like strongest links when it came to him moving were Benfica and Roma, who at the very end didn't. I think they offered like 25 or 20 something. They didn't want to go up to all the way up to 30. Um, but I would be okay with either of those moves. I think he would do well in either. I do prefer, I think, the Benfica move because I mean, in the Club World Cup for me, the squad that I saw from Benfica kind of showcase key areas that they needed to address, particularly in midfield, because obviously I know when it came to the defense, they already had like big injuries, and I like what I've been liking what they have been doing so far in the window. They before going for Rios, they got a loan deal for Enzo, not Chelsea's Enzo, but Aston Villa's Enzo, who is a huge promise, and they're linked now with João Felix coming back. So just looking at the little bit triangle, not saying that they're going to be in midfield, but of players, having Enzo, Richard Rios, and João Felix is something I think fans can be excited about in terms of creating. And if you look at the Portuguese league, is a league that allows you a lot of space, as you've seen in terms of both counterattacks, but it's not like a pressing machine. It's not what you usually see in the Premier League. So it gives you a little bit more space and time to pick out the passes and to shoot from outside the box or to create something. And I think Rios will really impress with that. I have high expectations for him going there. And I will be very disappointed if he doesn't take the league by the storm. I'm going to be completely honest.
Yeah, if he can't go to Portugal and dominate or get in front of
Yeah.
Renato Sanchez, he should be getting involved and starting in that 11. If he can't dominate there, then maybe I was right all along that the Premier League was slightly out of reach. But I think you've hit the nail on the head there in terms of how with Benfica, he's not going to be pressed relentlessly. He can sort of adapt to stronger teams in Europa League, Champions League, etc. in time if he stays there. But it's a nice stepping stone, isn't it? Because his career's been a little bit delayed anyway. So if he goes to Portugal, shines within a year or two, there's no reason why he then can't take that next step to the Premier League. I know we're seeing more and more go from Portugal back to Brazil or Saudi. Hopefully that doesn't happen with Richard Rios. There's been so much talk about him for a long period of time, but he is at his best when he can dominate on the ball and get forward. That's when his confidence grows and grows. Where if he was going to go to a Premier League side and not be in possession, that's when I'm worried about him. That's when I feel like there's mistakes within his game. So I'm not saying that he's a poor player at all, because that would just be me trying to throw out contradictions just for the sake of it. But I think the move is very fitting, similar to what we spoke about Arias, similar to Danilo. I quite like all three. And I don't know if you saw, Jess, but his arrival, sidetracking away from the player he is, the arrival in the suit, the swag, the
Yeah,
scarf.
yeah.
I really enjoyed
I
seeing that,
will
to be
say,
honest. Go on.
yeah, and I will say, I was reading some because I didn't realize, being someone that follows the Premier League the closest, right? So when you look at the huge fees and all of that, but I saw that it was Benfica's biggest ever purchase and one of the biggest of the league or something like that. And that took
Wow.
me, I was like, wow. So
Yeah.
that leaves him with a lot of responsibility as well, which just,
Mm.
showcases, I think, their belief in him and how he can help them. I think Benfica sometimes struggle with creation a little bit, and maybe perhaps that's why they looked at him and see how he can. He is also very physical, even though he's not someone that like Jhon Arias or anything. He is not someone that you can just touch and he will fall. So I think he would do very well in this league. And as I said, I'm expecting him to take it by storm, and I will be very disappointed in him if he doesn't do so.
Let's move across to the last player we want to talk about in this particular episode. And similar to the Danilo story, this is a player who went to Europe with high expectations, didn't perform at the level expected, but now he's come back to Brazil. He's the top goal scorer for Cruzeiro, 12 goals in 14 games for Kaio Jorge. 4 assists as well, and his assist at the weekend was a bicycle kick. I mean, I'm not sure if he was going for goal, but he's at the moment, everything is just falling right for him, and it's a it's a player I'm getting very excited about. He's one of the players who you want to tune in every week, and at home you just know for Cruzeiro he's going to do something. He's forming this wonderful relationship with whoever he plays with in a 4-3-3 or 4-4-2 at times. But this is the player to keep an eye on. Yes, he's already been to Europe. It didn't quite work out in Italy, but he's come back, and it's similar to the Paulinho story, isn't it? Where he's come back in an environment which works for him, and he just can't stop scoring. And I don't think he's going to make a move this window. I think it's too early, but clubs will definitely be having a look at him, won't they, Jess?
Yeah, I think they already are. There was an article with interviews with him, I think this month, so the month of July, like in the beginning of July, where he admitted that Cruzeiro already got a few, like not bids, but inquiries and seeing his situation because his contract runs until 2029. And so, I mean, I also agree. I don't expect him to leave now. But you look at this Cruzeiro side, and it's very interesting because before the beginning of the season, you would talk about Flamengo, Botafogo, and Palmeiras. Nobody would even, remember to talk about Cruzeiro or put Cruzeiro as one of the favorites. And I mean, they are having a great season. Obviously, Flamengo, I think they have 2 less games than they do, but they are leading right now, and they're performing well. So it's nice. It's you like they're organized. They're fun to watch. As you mentioned for Kaio Jorge, and as we were talking about Danilo before, it's that moment where you say, okay, sometimes it works to take that step back and to just, as you mentioned, going to a place where you understand the environment, you feel at home. The pressure is completely different, and you're talking about young players, and they are still young players, and when you talk about a move to Europe, it's every little piece has to fall into place for it to work. It's not only the talent. So, at times they don't. And it's okay to take a step back and to reassess and to try again. So it's just fantastic. And again, comparing to the Danilo situation, when you're talking about the Brazilian national team, there are 2 names that right now, if you woke up and watch the TV or a show about punditry or anything, there are João Pedro, who's now at Chelsea, and Kaio Jorge. Those are the 2 names that people are like, okay, we want to see them in the national team, because obviously when you're talking about the Brazilian national team, it's not the the early 2000s anymore. So there is a lot of space for young players to impress, and there isn't that one name that's the absolute starter. So it can benefit those players to right now be in the Brasileirão and just have a phenomenal season, get that attention and show that they can contribute. Because as you've seen, even though we would never say Brasileirão is the same standard as other leagues, particularly not the Premier League, it's still a very competitive league. It's still physical. And as we've shown, I think people have seen in the Club World Cup. So it is possible, I think, for Ancelotti right now to be looking at this and say, okay, I can take a few players here to compete in the international level, and they can keep up, right? I'm not going to be doing so. It's very interesting. And with Kaio Jorge particularly, one thing that I do enjoy is that, and you mentioned his assist, is that he is that type of forward that he doesn't need to score to have a good game because of what he offers when he doesn't have the ball, and even when he does, in terms of creation, he is everywhere. I was watching earlier today an interview from Rafinha. He's part of a big punditry thing in Brazil right now. Rafinha, ex-Bayern, ex-Flamengo. And he was talking about how he is impressed with Kaio in terms of where he is on the pitch. He was like, he is everywhere. He is not receiving the ball. He goes to even to the center backs, and he's right, he's left, he's in the center. So, watching this phenomenal player, because whether people like him or not, Rafinha is someone that well respected, and he has won everything with Bayern Munich. Talking about this player, and one thing he said, you can see the drive. That's what he said. You look at Kaio Jorge and you see that he wants this. He wants it. He's all the time asking for the ball and not afraid and being very courageous on the pitch. And so that's something that's very likable, I think, as a football fan for you to watch. And, as a Brazilian fan, long may it continue, and let's see how he develops and let's see how the season goes for him. But it's definitely one to keep an eye on, for sure.
And if you think about it, last season, Yuri Alberto, who was the star of the show, won the Golden Boot with, I believe, 16, 17 league goals.
Yeah.
Now, Jorge is on 12, 13 already. Like, he's going to outscore him easily as long as he doesn't get injured or anything like that. And if we draw comparisons even more to how he's performing at the moment, Vitor Roque has come back to Brazil in Palmeiras' front line and has struggled. He scored 2 or 3 goals, and his 2 or 3 goals have been really messy finishes. I know they all count, but he's not been spectacular. He's really struggled to find his feet, which just goes to show how strong the league is. I know, Jess, earlier you said we're not comparing it to the likes of the Premier League, for example, but more and more people saw over the Club World Cup like how close the league is becoming and how competitive it actually is. So the fact that he's only 3 or 4 goals already off last season's Golden Boot winner, and Vitor Roque came back for 30 million from Barcelona, and he struggled in arguably the best team in the league. It just goes to show what an incredible job he's doing at Cruzeiro. And like you said, nobody predicted it, Jess, but if you followed our Instagram and TikTok pages, we highlighted Cruzeiro as the team to watch this season. Don't think that at any point they were going to be top.
Yeah, exactly. Did you predict that they were going to be fighting for the title? Okay.
But I think it's fair to say now, it's easy to say now why they're top, but you have to say they are the best team. I think you said just the word fun describes Cruzeiro. Yes, they're top and Flamengo have got games in hand, but they've beaten Flamengo at home. They've beaten Palmeiras at home. And they're out of the competitions. They outright said, like, not even just the manager, but Cruzeiro did a couple of announcements really around the Sudamericana that they wanted to be out of it. They didn't care for it. They wanted to concentrate on the league, which was a big statement considering at the time they weren't even in the top 6 or 7. But look, led by a wonderful striker, Gabi Barbosa, he's bagged a couple of goals when he's come in as well. So, like, they're an exciting team to watch. And yeah, like you said, teams will be sniffing around him for sure. So 3 completed deals we've spoken about on this podcast. One, which feels inevitable if Cal keeps his form up, definitely over the next 6 to 8 months. So one to keep an eye on. But look, Jess, thank you so much for coming back on for a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the latest transfer news. I'm sure there'll be plenty more, and we'll try to keep our listeners up to date. So please do subscribe to the podcast across Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Give us a like, give us a rating. It helps us grow, helps us keep coming back, giving you more updates on the South American market. But Jess, any update from you, or just thanks again for coming onto the show?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's always incredible to be here and rant away about the league and the players that we love. I would say a club that people should be following closely in the market right now. They're making big moves or looking to make big moves are Flamengo. Obviously, right now we all know that Saúl Ñíguez is joining them, but there are other names as well. Young players from the Colombian League have been linked, so it's one to definitely keep an eye out for. Also, there's the problem with Wesley, and he's a fullback, right back, whether or not he's going to move to Roma. So there are a lot of questions right now, but they are very active in the market, and I think we're going to see them even get a lot more players in, actually, because their biggest issue has been the lack of depth. They have a very strong 11, but by the time the substitutes come in and they kind of drop a little bit, so they've been looking to strengthen there. So just keep an eye out for them, because I think we're going to be seeing some very interesting moves until the end of the window for sure.
Absolutely. And as they conclude, as the signings happen, Jess and I will be back to review the highest profile ones and then highlight, of course, ones to watch along the way. So once again, thank you for listening. Stay safe, and we'll see you very soon.